Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I am Rebecca Gill and today we're going to be talking about modern SEO. The reason I wanted to start the year off with this webinar is because it's massively changed, at least SEO has massively changed over the last couple of years. When I first started doing SEO 15 years ago, I don't even actually really want to admit to the things that we did. I mean, really, it was like cowboy SEO consultants out there, and we really just kind of did what we thought we could and get away with it, which is not today's SEO. Today's SEO is definitely different than what it was in the past. And in the last year, I think that we've seen a lot of changes, and I think that we're going to see a lot more changes coming forth, going forward. And so that's what I kind of want to just start the year off and give you all an idea of what you need to be aware of as you march forward in 2018 with your SEO activities. So modern SEO utilizes a building block approach to ranking, and you're going to see that today. I'm going to cover a number of topics, not a whole ton, but a number of different topics that I want you to be aware of and make sure that you understand. And as I walk through these, you're going to see that they build upon each other, that you really need to have a good understanding of each element and how it relates to the way we used to do things and the way that we have to do things moving forward. So some SEO trends and changes that we've watched happen over the last couple of years. Google moved to focus on mobile websites and really well done responsive sites. It didn't want just desktop websites anymore, and it didn't want just mobile only websites. It really wanted responsive websites. And the representatives of Google talk about that today, where they say, it's easier for them if there's one website with one set of URLs than having multiple websites that they have to dig through. And so we know that that change to occur. We know that it's important to the search engines, and it's going to continue to grow in importance. The move to having SSL certificates and websites that are fully HTTPS based, very important. We saw a huge shift in that recently, and we are only going to see a greater shift coming as we move forward with Google. And they've been putting out announcements on this. And if you have a website that isn't on an SSL certificate, now is the time to make sure that happens, because you're already kind of behind the game on that. So we need to make sure that we get you up to speed, and we have a healthy website that is fully SSL enabled and not just bits and pieces. So AMP came out, and at first when AMP came out, it was really focused on publishers, although now businesses are starting to adopt it. And we will be talking about AMP today because it is something that you need to be aware of as we move forward. The next item was Google, the knowledge graph. We're going to be talking about that today because that definitely has shifted search and the way that we do things and the way that we as webmasters or bloggers interact with the search engines. Voice search also, I can't even tell you how much voice search gets used in my house by my kids or my husband. It's everyday users, and it's becoming more and more popular, and we as marketers or website owners need to adapt to that. An increased usage of topic-based searches and less emphasis on exact match phrases. We're definitely going to cover that today because that is a big shift, and that's been happening over time. When I first started out with SEO, if you had two phrases that were similar, like software and system, or even softwares with an S, or systems with an S, it was hard to rank on all four with one piece of content because the search engines didn't think that way. We had to have individual pieces of content if we wanted to be able to rank on those various versions of the phrase. Well, now those are all considered kind of a topic, and they all go together. And it's changed the way that the search engines, and particularly Google, provide results for this data. And we need to know how to react to that and how to manage that as well. Okay, so the next item is an increased focus on the user experience. I can't tell you how much this has shifted. 15 years ago, we could care less. I mean, from as an SEO standpoint, what the users thought of the website or the blog. I mean, we hid text within the background of the page because it didn't matter at that point. Well, it does today, and this is growing with importance to the search engines. You have to create a really positive user experience because you need those people to stay on the site, to return to your site, to, convert on your site, and the search engines are watching activity to make sure that when they send someone over to your website or blog, it is a positive user experience. Those people are staying and they are happy, because if they're not and they bounce back to the search engine results page, it's actually going against you, and it's going to be compromised, for your ranking purposes. And so the last one is the looming presence of mobile first index. It is coming, folks. It was supposed to come in 2017. We will cover that today, since Google did push it back to 2018, but we'll talk about that because it is something that you need to be aware of, and you need to make sure that you are prepared for it. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about today and go in depth is semantic search. And the reason for this is, man, this is just getting so important. And I will admit, I just kind of ignored this at first. It intimidated me. I felt like it was for the really smart SEO consultants, and I wasn't smart enough for it. And it's just silly now that I think back at those feelings and that kind of imposter syndrome, because when you break down what semantic search is, it feels like common sense, and you can see why the search engines are using it and why Google is putting more and more emphasis on it. And so I want to go through that today because it is important, and it's going to be more important as we move forward in the future with SEO and trying to rank for Google. So what the heck is semantic search? Semantic search is really, it's just defined as a search process that is based on the intent of the searcher and the contextual meaning of those search terms. So instead of looking at just an individual term itself, Google attempts to interpret the user intent with that search and then match it to results based on a variety of factors like content, trends, and prior activity. And I'm going to go into that in more depth. But the bottom line, what this means to you is that Google just got a whole lot smarter. And you can't try to game the system. You can't try to manipulate the system. You need to truly try to understand what matters to Google and why they're doing what they're doing, because that's how you're going to be able to rank. So let's dig into semantic search a little bit more. So semantic search isn't new, but like me and like I was, many people just didn't understand the importance of it or understand it because it feels like it's just really technical and it's advanced. But it's just the understanding of how a search will relate to today's activity in the world. And by today, I mean, it could be something that just happened 15, 20, 50 minutes ago. It's very real time. So semantic search seeks to improve the search accuracy by understanding what you, the searcher, are trying to accomplish. What is your intent? Your intent, and how does that intent relate to the world around you? And it's the world around you that makes it really important. Like Google is looking to see what people are searching for in comparison to what's happening right now in life around us. It's not about synonyms. A lot of people say, and I see this on Twitter a lot, and especially in content, they'll say semantic search is all about synonyms. So you just need to make sure that you put synonyms in your page and your content, and you're going to be fine with semantic search. But that's not accurate. Synonyms are a portion of semantic search. They are not all of semantic search. Google's much smarter than that, and it's using a lot of factors now to really figure things out. So semantic search brings forth a vastly improved understanding of both the searcher's intent and the content that is going to be used in results. So how is the search engines doing that? They're looking at more factors, right? They're taking into account a lot of different things. So they look at current trends, like a recent movie launch. So what if there was a movie called Grounded? And prior to that movie getting released, I went and searched for Grounded. Now, I'm going to get terms that are related to grounding something to the earth or, something like that. But if that movie came out and it's been very popular and people start to look for it, if someone goes into Google and searches for Grounded, the results are going to change. Google knows that that movie just got launched. It knows that the intent of a lot of users are based on that movie, and so it's going to react accordingly. The location of your search goes into the semantic search. So if I'm searching for something that has one meaning in the US versus one meaning over in France, Google's going to take that into account. The intent and what it believes to be the intent. So a hot dog I would eat versus a hot dog that needs shade. right? We've seen Google use that in the past, but it's now getting smarter and smarter in how it uses it. You know, it would try to interpret what did I really want, you know, before. And I've talked about this in past webinars. Am I looking for the hot dog I'm going to eat that goes on a bun and I put ketchup with it? Or am I looking for information on how to take care of my hot dog because he's hot and he needs shade? Now, we've seen again that kind of search and those results before, but it's shifted. Now Google's a lot more smart when it's looking at content. It's looking again at more variables. Word variations like singular or plural. We used to have completely different pages to try to rank for both of those. We don't need to do that anymore. Again, Google's smart enough to understand that they can be used interchangeably. Synonyms. So if I look for a tiny house versus a small house versus a miniature house, Google knows that those are all kind of the same thing, and it knows that most people are using the phrase tiny house, right? So it's smart, it knows that. Generalized versus specialized, it knows that accommodations in Vegas could be the MGM Grand because it knows how to relate that, and it's coming back to how it uses the knowledge graph. It's word groupings and it's related words as well. There's so many things that go into the semantic search, which makes it really wonderful for the searcher because they're getting much better quality in their results given by search engines. But it does make it more difficult for us as the marketers because we have to be more aware of how we select those search terms and how we write that content. So let's look at some variations of searches. And it was kind of fun starting to do this and create this for the presentation, but I will tell you, I went back 2 days later and started doing the same thing, and I was getting different results from Google. There are days where Google makes me want to drink because you just can't keep up with the shifts and just the testing it does because it's constantly tweaking how things are presented. But so let's go forward with the examples I did pull because they were accurate just a little bit ago. So if you type in one word search like wiener, you know, to me, that's like a hot dog or a sausage, right? Google can gather some intent, but it doesn't really know, because if you look at the search engine results page, you're seeing a mix of information. So it's telling me that the wiener could also be a sausage or a frankfurter or a weenie. It gives me some data on the hot dog itself, like the number of fat grams in it and carbs and things like that. Then it starts to pull in data for a person like Scott Wiener, and it starts to show his Twitter activity, right? That's just kind of all confused, right? And the reason it's confused is because Google doesn't know what you're looking for. There's not enough there for Google to be able to say, okay, I see the intent of this search. And so it doesn't have that. So it just starts mixing in people and food and dictionary and things like that. So difficult, right? But now what if we take our search and we put in something different, right? We start to add words. Now semantic search can kick in because Google can understand what the heck's going on. So if I take my search term of just Apple, which Google would struggle with because it wouldn't know if I was talking about the company or the fruit, it really wouldn't know. But if I start adding in like best tasting apple, Google now understands that I'm talking about the food, because typically you would not eat your computer or eat a computer from the company Apple. If I put the word cheapest along with Apple, Google automatically starts to assume that I'm talking about laptops, right? And people are looking for cheap laptops from the company Apple. So Google is getting smarter. We can get quickly back too confused. If I took away those phrases and I just said wash apple, you can see Google's kind of giving me a mixed results again. I've got apples at the top that are the food, and then it's talking about the Apple Watch on the side, and you can just tell it doesn't know what the heck I want. So why would we do this? Why would I even take the time to look at this type of information? The reason I'm doing that is because as we move forward as marketers and we're trying to figure out, you know, what do we want to target in search? How do we want to present that content? You know, that type of thing. We need to be very cognizant of these phrases and how Google's using them, right? Because we need to have that education and that information so we can make better decisions on if it is the right keyword phrase to go after and how you should best present your content. So just as a recap, the two-word search is slightly confusing. There's not a lot of good information here. Google doesn't know whether I'm talking about the food or I'm talking about the company or something else. So as a marketer and I were to look at this, I'm like, okay, so probably not a great search phrase to go after right now because Google's confused about it. I would much rather have a phrase that is very closely tied to the intent of my content, matching to the intent of the user search. So I know page one results are going to actually deliver what's relevant to what I want to rank on and what kind of search traffic I want to bring in. So what would our takeaways be for semantic search? First and foremost, you don't need or want to create individual pages for each variation of a keyword phrase. We did that 10 years ago. We don't need to do that today, right? We need to be smarter and we need to think harder about what we're going to be ranking on. We need to write and optimize content with keyword variations in mind. Remember, variations aren't the entire portion of semantic search, but synonyms, variations, and things like that, they play into it, right? So we need to be aware of those. We need to augment our content for related phrases. And we're doing this so Google can better understand what we're talking about. So if we take back that example and we start looking at just Apple, if I was writing about Apple and I wanted to rank for a specific phrase with Apple, how would I help Google figure out the difference between the different types of user intent for a search and the content that I'm offering? Well, if I was going after the food, I would use things in my content like taste and color and freshness. Those Google understands are related to the food, and it would help them better understand that content is about the food and thus relate it to searches for the food apple. If I was talking about a computer and I was talking about Apple computers, I would want to use like the phrase computer, but also like cost and support and features and monitoring keywords. And all those phrases and those terms that Google understands relate to a laptop or maybe an iPad. It just helps them understand that's the purpose of my content and that is what my content is about. If it was the company, I would say things like founders and stock prices and headquarters and store locations. And as you look at your content and you write your content, if you're doing it with the idea of semantic search, you're helping the search engines better figure out what your content is about and who it's an ideal fit for. And this plays into that longer content being more popular on page one of Google. Think back to how we used to do this before when we could rank on page one for a 300 word count post. Well, that doesn't quite happen today. I mean, we have to have content that's much longer and much more robust, right? But when you look at the sophistication that Google is going through with determining content and matching it up to search results, now you see why some of that longer content can rank better. And it's because Google can better understand it and it can use it within semantic search to really figure out who it's a good fit for. Okay, so just a few more takeaways. Think long and hard about your possible keywords. There's a lot more involved in selecting keywords today than there was 10 years ago. And you need to make sure that you are going to page one of Google and you're searching for phrases and you're looking what's on page one and page two so you can really figure out if your potential keyword phrase relates to what you really want to rank on. I want you to think long and hard about those long tail search phrases. Veer towards those and away from one-word searches or even two-word searches because they don't work well with semantic search because it's difficult for the search engines and particularly Google to figure out that user intent. I want you to write for the human reader, right? Don't write for the search engines. It just doesn't serve you or the human well. Make sure you're writing for that human. You're giving them complete information. And when you really are covering a full topic of information, that's when you're naturally writing for semantic search without even realizing you're doing it. Okay, so the next thing I want to cover is the knowledge graph. I have covered this in past presentations, so I'm not going to go into the full depth that I have, but I do want to reiterate and reinforce what the knowledge graph is and how it applies to you. So it was first introduced in 2012. Since its release, it has diversified in the data that's presented and it's greatly expanded in usage. I mean, it is amazing how much the knowledge graph is out there now. I remember when it first came out, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And you would see it once in a great while. Now it's all over the search engine results page and it's growing every single day, it seems like. And so what the knowledge graph is just simply a huge collection of people, places, and things. But what's important is that Google actually understands how those people, places, and things are connected, and it uses that information to produce better results. This fits right in with semantic search. It's that same type of philosophy. Google's looking at the search and how it relates to all the things in the world around us. It's kind of scary when you think about it, the amount of data that Google has and the amount of data it's using to produce good search results. So what are some examples? Like I said, we've done these in webinars past. Companies like Home Depot, people like you can search for the Nobel Prize winner and you'll actually get data that pops up that answers your questions. Sports teams, art, buildings, movies, recipes, music, images, and it's growing daily on what shows up in the knowledge graph type of data presentation. It is just amazing to me at how quickly this is shifting. So I'm saying it's shifting. Here's a good statistic for you. A recent study of 1.4 million queries shows that 50% or more of those queries have some form of knowledge graph data. So if you're sitting in this webinar listening to me and you're multitasking, yeah, you guys come back and listen, and you're thinking this doesn't apply to you, it does apply to you because 50% or more of searches are bringing in this type of data. So if you don't understand what this type of data is and how to potentially rank for it, you're missing out on search activity and traffic to your website or blog. So what are those 50%, including things like featured snippets and rich answers and direct answers and other things that just continue to grow. So let's look at just a couple of these. The Knowledge Panel came out in 2012. It's also called Knowledge Cards. It's like brand or local. It's Home Depot as a brand, or it's like the local pizza place. There's 4 main sources of this information. It's information that you've given to like Google My Business. It's information on your website. It's information that Google's gotten from users outside of you that use Google services. And then it's third-party sources of information that you wouldn't have necessarily control over. And here's those examples that I just gave. So the brand on the left, that's the results for the brand that comes up, versus if there's a local example and I'm searching for like Mexican restaurants. Same type of information, but just presented differently because there's different types of data sources and then just different types of presentation based on the search itself. So the knowledge box, also called the answer box, was introduced in 2013. Again, continuing to grow in usage, and you can see this over with the graph on the right. It just provides simple data as answers. The negative of this is it doesn't provide a link to a specific website, and frustrating, right, as marketers, because like Stone Temple Consulting's graph to the right shows you the increase in usage, and yet it's not bringing us any traffic. But don't despair, you've got lots of other opportunities to rank and to bring in traffic. The key point of this one is we don't have control over it. So I don't want you to stress over it. I just want you to be aware of it and know it's there. And potentially if you do a search, because you're going to try to rank for something, if the knowledge box pops up and it's dominating the page and that's answering the question quickly, and your content is going to probably get pushed down the page, and you might want to select something slightly different. Here's just some examples: seasonal allergies, weather, stocks, and things like that. We've all probably used it without even realizing we've been using it. So the next one is featured snippets. It was introduced in 2014. I always like to call this position 0 because it's what shows up at the top. This one, again, makes me want to drink because it's changing all the time. You may be showing up as featured snippets one day, and then the next day you can be off, and then it can come back again. So it is kind of frustrating. The good parts about this is it does link to your website or the source data. It's great for long tail keywords. It does not require any special coding. It just needs really good content, from you so that you can show up. It's what Google wants to pull in, this high quality content to make sure you are presenting the best answer for the search. How do you rank for them? High quality, long form content. Have a paragraph that describes or gives a summary of the content at hand. Have it to be around 40 to 50 words, because that allows Google to scoop up that paragraph of 40 words and plop it at the top of the search engine results page, answer that question, and then give people a link to go to your content and get a more elaborate answer or expanded answer. Questions like what, how, why, those are all great for answering those questions. You don't need to have those questions in your content. You just need to think about what people would actually ask for that relates to what you're producing content and you want to rank. Write for humans and remember that semantic search. Make sure that you're covering the topic as a whole and you're using phrases and terms that will help the search engines understand what the content intent is to match it up. Lists and tables, great. You'll notice that they show up. It helps Google better present data quickly in the search engine results pages. Organize your content. This is a Rebecca pet peeve. Make sure that you're using H1, H2, H3s correctly. It is done with an outline approach in mind because, again, that helps Google understand the content, your intent, and match that up to the user's intent. All right, so rich cards. They came out in 2016, but they weren't widely available until 2017, which shows you that this is all still continuing to change and just get more advanced. It supports content previews and search results. It can link to website content. Site owners can influence this because you're actually creating information for search engines for these rich cards, and you're doing so with structured data and having the correct markup. So what are the takeaways I want you to have for the knowledge graph? I want you to remember that page one is changing, right? The real estate for page one ranking just got a lot smarter. And if you're relying on those old school SEO tactics, you're just gonna struggle. But I also want you to remember that if you take advantage of those modern SEO tactics, your opportunities for ranking in page one just got a lot bigger, right? You can dominate that page if you do things correctly. You can't just write content and expect that you're going to rank. You have to really continue to think about the search engines and how they're using that content in search results. You need to understand how your website and content interact with the world. Because remember, we said the semantic search is looking at current trends and locations and things like that, as is the knowledge graph, right? If you were to search for things like the Olympics or anything about the Winter Olympics 6 months ago, you'd have different search results than you have today because the Olympics are going on, especially gold medal winners and things like that. I haven't tested it, but I know today's results would be much different than in the past. Ranking in organic search requires a blend of on-page, off-page, and a solid understanding of technical SEO. They've got to all blend in together for you to really dominate search in today's environment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about structured data and schema. I've actually started to really fall in love with structured data and schema. And again, this is something that used to really freak me out before, which I think back and it just seems silly to me that it did. It is not that difficult. Am I a savant of structured data? No, but I fully understand the concepts and I can see how it can really help a website owner or blog, just really beef up their presence in search. So schema.org is just a collaborative community that's created kind of a language that is read through a variety of things like, web pages and email messages, and it creates some uniformity to it. It's shared vocabularies that can seem scary, but it's not. It doesn't have to be scary. But those vocabularies are structured and used by the Google and Bing and email and things like that, so that it is common and everybody is kind of using and interpreting and reading the same type of information and in the same way. Today over 10 million sites use schema markup, which is pretty cool. So vocabularies are at the heart of schema. They cover entities and relationships and then actions. There's data and there's things. So there's data as in the presentation of that data, but then there's those things that data can represent, like reviews and events and podcasts and books and musics and things like that. And when you look at schema and structured data, you may think that it's pretty limited. And the funny thing is with WordPress, people are like, well, what plugin can I use that can produce all this schema for me? There isn't one. There is no one plugin that's going to solve all schema problems because there's so many options. 597 types, 867 properties, and 114 values, right? That's a lot of schema opportunities. And that's why there isn't a one-size-fits-all type of plugin. So really, what is it? It helps the search engines understand content like a human would. It is not required for all knowledge panel results, although it can influence some of them. Google does not guarantee that it will use your structured data and it will present you in search results with that structured data in mind. This is particularly true if you've kind of bumbled your implementation of it. Google's very structured on how you present that information and have it available, because if it's not done right, it is not going to accept it. It's not going to use it. You must include all of the required properties. And this is where some people fall down, is because they don't realize that they have to have all of these items for it to actually, work. There are 3 different types of presentations that you can use for schema. So you do have some options. Let's put this in a visual, presentation. So how does Google look at websites without it? So it looks at 3 different websites that are used within the physical location of Vegas. One's a hotel, one is a restaurant bar, and one is an event. Search engines will look at this and go, oh, those are nice websites, but I really don't understand them, right? It's not fully grasping the content without schema and structured data present. But when you bring in that structured data, now the search engines can say, okay, not only are these pretty, I can really understand what it is because you're telling me. You're using that structured data to tell me that the MGM Grand is a hotel. It's got accommodations. It's got special pricing, and here's what's available and what's not. If it's a restaurant or a bar, you're actually giving me that location. You can see a step-down approach with that schema. I mean, it can really get down to bar or restaurant and things like that. And then like for the Cirque du Soleil, it knows that this is an event, that this website is presenting event data, and it can use that data to better answer questions for someone in search. So I go to search and I'm going to Vegas and I'm like, hey, what's going on and what events are going on in March? Well, the search engines can use that data, that structured data, to be able to give me the answer for that. Okay, so structured data in use. What we see as beautiful presentations of information that solve all of our problems on the right is this guy right here, right? How does he come about? Did you ever wonder that? Well, he's getting generated by data that looks kind of like this, that's pulling in these entities and properties and things like that. And it's using these elements, and it's actually, there's code for this, and it's translating that presentation. So you just break that down. It helps the search engines better understand the content, better understand what that content is and how it relates to the world around it and the search intent. And then it allows the search engines, particularly Google, to give us really good information like this on the right. And that's the basis of structured data. Now, one thing about structured data is that I tend to have people who have no understanding what it is say to me, well, I want some structured data on my website. Great. What would that be? If their website's small and it's pretty basic, there isn't a lot of structured data that they would have, right? It's not that you just have structured data that fits every type of scenario. You really don't. You have to have a purpose for it, and it has to fit within all of those data parameters that we were talking about, all of those vast options that we have. But again, not every website needs to have structured data. If you're a local website, you absolutely do. And there's tools like the Yoast SEO plugin for local that will help create it for you, right? So it's not a matter of, do you need to have structured data on your site? Because you may not, right? So don't jump into the fact that you think that you absolutely have to have it. It depends on the type of content that you're presenting, and a number of other variable factors like location. Are you a local business? Do you want Google to understand that information better? And so those are things to take away. The last one is you need to really be careful, because Google, like I said earlier, Google does not take kindly to poorly implemented structured data. So make sure that when you're doing it, you are following the rules, you've read up on it, or you've hired someone that understands it and that knows how to present it. And it's little simple things like Google wants to have the structured data be on a specific recipe, not a big list of recipes, right? It's simple as that, but you can get tripped up with the search engines, pretty much annoy the search engines, and then get warning messages from Google. Okay, now let's talk about voice search. Voice search, like I said at the beginning of this webinar, has continued to grow. My house uses it all the time, and I know my house can't be alone. Everybody, it seems, is using Siri, or it's got a Google Assistant, or Google Now, Google Home, Alexa. They're just very prevalent, and it's funny how much that those have grown and how they've been popular gifts for like Christmas and birthdays and things. So in 2016, Google stated voice search had already reached 20% as searchers. 40% of adults now use voice search at least once per day, according to Location World. ComScore estimates that 50% of all searches will be voiced by 2020. I don't know if I really believe that, because I really like to use my keyboard, and I don't use voice search that much. My kids do, but I don't. But we see that it's a continuing trend up, and that people are continuing to use it and will continue to adopt it even more. Why is it so popular? It answers questions, right? It uses those long tail keyword phrases that we don't necessarily want to type into the computer, but we are more than willing to spill those out in a voice request. It's using that conversational approach to search, combining it with semantic search, and producing pretty darn good results, and that are pretty accurate most of the time. I mean, sometimes they're really far off, but for the most part, they are really, really good results. Voice search uses data from like the knowledge panel, feature snippets, Google My Business profiles. It's also using some structured data and schema when that applies. And because it's just often on mobile, websites have to be mobile friendly, and they need to be able to load quickly, and they need to be able to support voice search. Is there a lot you need to do for voice search? Well, you need to consider long tail keyword phrases. You need to think about answering questions for your searchers, and if you have like that local business, you need to think about having good structured data on your site. So when someone asks for your hours of operations, someone actually can get the right results, because Google can pull that right out of your website and give that back as an answer. All right, so what are our takeaways on voice search? I went through it pretty quickly because there's not a whole ton that you have to be concerned about. You need to know it's here. You need to know it's growing in usage. You need to know that it's conversational. It uses semantic search, and it uses a knowledge graph. Remember I said all this kind of stuff is starting to build upon itself, and it definitely is. That's how modern search works today. Okay, so you need to write content that's for users, and you can't just write content to write content, right? And I know people say that, and I keep bringing that up on my takeaways, because I want to reinforce that, because I run into people at conferences, or on training sessions, or in email, or in social media, that say, you know what, I don't need to worry about SEO. I write good content, and then it just, people find me. Well, great, sure, but you're going to be missing out on a lot, because you're not considering all of these different variables that are now so frequently used by Google, right? And I don't want you to be intimidated by these. I don't want you to be fearful of them. I want you to be aware of them, and then think through how they may apply to what you're doing with SEO and search. And it also comes back to focusing on that human visitor, and writing content that is conversational, that answers the intent of the user, and that intent is closely tied to what you're writing, or what you're creating, and how you are formatting that writing. That's why I love the subheaders and that type of breakout, because it does help with all of these modern techniques. You need to keep that semantic search in mind when you're looking for keyword phrases and considering what you're going to write, because again, that's closely tied to voice search. You need to get your house in order and make sure that you have solid SEO on page, off page, and inside your code. Notice I'm reinforcing that one too, because we've been into the thought process from years ago that we had on page and we had off page. We had content and keywords, and then we had backlinks. Well, great, we still have those, but things have changed. We got a whole lot more things that are going on, and we have to be cognizant of those, because it is a holistic approach to SEO. All right, so the next one, mobile first indexing. Who is afraid of mobile first indexing? Who has clients who are afraid of mobile first indexing? I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to just to understand it and really see what it's about. So what is it? Simply means that Google is moving towards a different type of approach for crawling and indexing sites. If you have a website that is both mobile friendly as well as desktop friendly, and it's the same site and it presents content the same way, you should be good to go. If you have a website that is not mobile friendly and it's only a desktop version, then you're going to have some issues, because what's going to happen is Google's going to go out and it's going to start to look at the websites to crawl and index. If there's a mobile version, it's going to crawl that first and look at that content, right? And it's going to use that content to go and push into the index and decide where it's going to rank in search results. If there isn't one, it's going to flip back to the regular desktop version, and it will use that. Now it's a different world, because will that desktop version rank as well as a mobile version when Google clearly wants mobile activity? Probably not, and that's something that you have to be aware of. All right, so what do you got to do to prepare? You need to make sure that your website is mobile responsive. Google says this is their preferred route. So you can have like big sites like Home Depot has got a mobile only site that scales back all the information. And when I'm in the store and I'm searching for something and I get that, it really frustrates me because I'm not seeing enough data to make a decision on whether it's the right product to buy or whether I need to go another route. So if you're in that environment and you've scaled back information, right, and they've got a mobile page for a product that has a fourth of the information as their desktop, well, that's the version Google's going to look at to potentially index and rank. And if you're lacking a bunch of content, that can be problematic. Again, Google's preference is that you've got one version of your website that's mobile responsive, so it doesn't have to worry about those different URLs and those different types of content. If your mobile website is responsive and it's the same version as your desktop, you need to make sure that you're not hiding a bunch of data on it. I know that we did that at the beginning of mobile responsive, and because we weren't thinking about mobile when we were doing design and we were doing coding, so people would just start to hide things. But now that's going to be a problem, because that's the version that Google's using to rank you. So if you're using completely separate sites and you do have that mobile versus desktop version, you need to just go through some steps. You need to make sure that the content is similar between the two sites and that you're not, taking out a bunch of content for mobile. If you're using structured data, it needs to be on both sites as well. Meta titles and descriptions, again, they need to be on both sites. And that's, with those larger sites, that tends not to happen. And then make sure that you verify both versions of your website in Google's Search Console. Get both XML sitemaps up there so that Google can truly fully understand and digest what you have available. So what are your takeaways? Have a well-coded, responsive website, and you should be good to go. You don't have to stress about this, right? It's going to roll out. You're probably not going to see very much changes. The only change you might see is if you have competitors who are not mobile friendly or have done really jacked up mobile presentations, they might get downgraded, and that might boost you up, right? So that would be a positive for you. If you have an outdated website that is only desktop, it's only got that desktop version, and I was just on one last night. I got a lead in from a friend and I pulled it up through LinkedIn. I was looking at it and I was like, oh, this is not mobile responsive. I could barely read it on my iPad. Those people, they've got problems, right? Because it's not, it's not user friendly. It's not the presentation that Google wants, and it's going to potentially downgrade them in search results. So update that to mobile responsive code. Either get a new template or have someone update your existing template so that it is really mobile responsive and adapts to different devices. If you have separate websites, you need to make sure that the content and the presentation of like structured data and things are similar. And just make sure your house is in order. And like this one, I don't want you to fear Google. I don't want you to think that the sky is falling, because really it's not. It's just some changes that you have to be aware of and make sure that you're prepared for it. So the next thing I want to go through is AMP. I know there's a lot of confusion about AMP. AMP is Accelerated Mobile Pages. It's a project by Google that's designed to help content load more quickly on mobile. See, we've got a trend here. It strips out what's termed unnecessary elements that might otherwise weigh down a page. Here's my challenge. Unnecessary is a relative term when you're talking about AMP and websites and blogs, right? And because of that, AMP isn't for every single website. When you're configuring AMP and it may feel like a scary endeavor, if you're using WordPress, there's 2 great plugins that will allow you to do it for you. AMP for WordPress is from Automatic. It will give you all of that core functionality. And then you can use Glue from Yoast, which does some presentations of it, kind of does the rest of the work that the Automatic plugin doesn't. So between those 2, you should be covered for the majority of AMP and you don't have to stress out. But the question is not, can you implement AMP? Is should you and do you need to? Is it right for you? Because it may not be right for you. And I've just got some quick takeaways for the AMP because I want you to remember that Google does make changes. You don't have to jump on every single change. AMP is one of them, right? It may not be right for you and your website. If you've got a lot of elements that may be considered unnecessary, right, by AMP and that get stripped out, it might actually go against you, especially if those are for bringing in money and revenue through ads and different features in the site that are now stripped out because they're not considered to be relevant for mobile usage. So if you're going to implement AMP, make sure that you've got a good staging environment so that you can test it out and see what is really happening. Like you can load up those plugins in your staging environment if you're like on Liquid Web or WP Engine, and then go to your mobile device, see what's showing with the AMP pages to make sure that stuff isn't getting stripped out, that you're really getting across to your visitors what needs to get across to them. Just do it in a safe environment and don't feel like you have to jump into that because you really don't, right? If you're a publisher and or you've got a really high volume of website with lots of content, maybe it is right for you, but do research first. Don't feel like you've got to just jump into it and make sure that you're, on the latest Google trend, because that's not really what it's about. Okay. The last thing I want to cover is technical SEO because technical SEO has shifted so much. I used to be afraid of it. As you can see, a lot of these things that I'm talking about today really just freaked me out and I just was wary of them. And the more I dig into them, the more I realize I don't have to be. So old technical SEO, here's the list, right? These are the things that we talked about. There ain't that many, right? There's like, I don't know, 8 or 9. And this was the list. This is what we were concerned about. But guess what? That isn't exactly what technical SEO is today. It's shifted. It's become much more advanced. So I still have that list on the left, but now I have all of these guys on the right? It's now how you access and present those archive pages and breadcrumbs, thin content, and HTML to content ratios, image optimization, that subheader usage that I continue to nag everybody about, content silos, internal linking. Do you have internal links? Are they deep? How are you presenting those links and where are they placed? Those are all technical items and that will greatly influence SEO. 301 redirects. This guy right here brings down more websites in ranking than any other because redesigns and refreshes get done and those are not implemented or they're done poorly, and that's a problem. So here's more technical SEO issues or items. I'm still going. Usability, content length, structured data, social graph usage, code validation, cross-browser testing, broken links, 404 pages, broken images, SSL certificates. It literally just continues to go, but these are all things we have to be aware of if we want to rank because the search engines are getting more sophisticated and to be able to support those more advanced techniques that we were talking about today, and I only went through some of them, we have to have our technical house in order. Things need to be right. And you need to be aware of all of these different elements and you need to understand how they relate to you, your website, and how Google's going to perceive your website. Notice I'm still not done with my list. I just refreshed the page and here's a whole nother bunch of items that fall under technical SEO and whether you are helping or hurting your website. Now, here's a thing that you need to be aware of, and it's really important. If you take away nothing else from today's webinar, I want you to take away this. Technical SEO has shifted. It's become super important in recent years, and it now spans the entire website design and development life cycle. I didn't say project, I said life cycle. It's graphic design and content planning and that architecture build out, whether you're using content silos, whether your graphic designer has built in some breadcrumbs, are they forcing things into tabs and one page when things should be 2 pages, your hosting selection, because you have to have secure, fast websites, your theme coding. You can't have a bunch of code bloat and a bunch of broken code and expect to rank. I have a client who I'm working on an audit for right now. She said she lost the majority of their traffic when they did the redesign, and she goes, I just feel like something's wrong in the site. And guess what? It's a hot mess. The code's a hot mess. The architecture's a hot mess. I mean, it's taking me forever because I'm documenting so many things that are wrong. And it's really because the developers probably didn't know what they didn't know. Data migration, those 301 redirects, how much data you're migrating. Are you skipping a bunch of data? Go live audits. You should be auditing your websites at go live, before go live, and post go live to make sure that you're addressing and catching all of those items I just went through. Ongoing maintenance and annual health checks are super important. You have to have them to continue to keep your website healthy and for it to be viewed as a healthy website by the search engines and for the search engines to want to rank you. The larger the website, the older the website, the more problems you have. The more people that touch the website, the more problems you have. The longer those audits and those health checks take, but it's because the more problems that they find and the more things you need to resolve. It needs to happen, and you need to make sure that that's part of your plan. So my takeaways for technical SEO. SEO is becoming more and more complex. It's not a one-time event. Technical SEO is something that you need to constantly be looking at, as is SEO. It's not something you can pass on to the intern because there's a lot of elements that go into the whole healthy view of SEO, right? Everyone needs to have a basic understanding of technical SEO and how it alters the web development process from start to finish. Developers need to truly understand technical SEO and how it alters their work both before, during, and then after the launch, right? All of it. It's the life cycle. And then if you're a marketer listening, you need to understand that this matters. And whoever's working on your site, whether it's an internal person or you've hired somebody, they need to have a good grasp of those things I just listed so that they can make sure that your house is in order. Okay, so wrapping up. Modern SEO is holistic. It is an ongoing journey. I always say SEO is not a destination, it's a journey, and it truly is. It spans the entire life cycle of a website or a blog. It's constantly changing. It's the responsibility of the team, because you can see a lot of the things that we talked about today wasn't just a developer or someone who's the marketer picking keywords. It covered a lot of different aspects and areas of the organization and how the organization interacts with the website. And those are things that I want you to take away, and I want you to be aware of them so that you can do your own audits and you can make sure that the things that you're doing, whether they be redesigns or revamps, are truly going to keep your website healthy and make sure that the search engines are viewing your content in the best possible light. All right. I do have some time for Q&A, so let me go through the ones that you have. If you did have a question and you wanted to ask me something, please feel free to go ahead and drop that in. Okay, so will there be a replay? Yes. This is done through GoToWebinar. GoToWebinar will send out an email tomorrow with the recording, and I will also make sure this gets uploaded to the YouTube channel. Will there be slides available? Yes, that's a great question. They are in my SlideShare account where I always have posted the slides, Cassandra, but I'll make sure that when I get off this webinar, I go in and edit the emails coming out from GoToWebinar, so that link will be available for you. Okay, so Marge, my friend, it's good to have you here. You are the next question. Do you suggest updating content or creating new content around these trends? Marge, it depends on the content and how well it relates to what's happening in search. I think you could go either way. It just matters, you know, which one is going to be best for that situation, right? Because it definitely does vary. There's not going to be a universal answer, I guess is what I'm trying to say there. Okay, I'm on overload. Yes, see, Lewis, I always feel like this too, but don't, because I mean, listen, if I can figure this stuff out and and anybody can, I always come with that. My degree is in accounting, right? But I love this kind of stuff. And so I really love to dig into it. So don't be overloaded. Just remember that you're always trying to think in the eyes of the search engine and how you can best support that user, right? And that user's intent, and match up what you're doing to the user intent. Okay, how important are backlinks compared to 10 years ago? That's from Megan. You know what, Megan? Backlinks are still really important, but I think the thing that we have to take away is that you can't live on backlinks alone, right? It's not like we were saying that backlinks and content was how we viewed SEO 10 years ago. Well, today we know that there's a lot more factors, and backlinks are absolutely still important, but you can't rely on them alone and think that you're going to rank. You have to actually, you know, go forth and do other things. Okay, is there a recommended plugin that might perform an audit? Dale, no. I'm going to tell you there are some software programs that you can purchase on a subscription basis, like, you know, SaaS-based, that will help in audits. You can look at Google Search Console, Bing Webmaster Tools. But when I do an audit, it's a paid event for somebody, and I spend anywhere from like 5 to 8 hours going through data from a number of different third-party sources and reports, as well as going through the website myself, like literally section by section, and looking at things. I have a list of like 90 things that I go through and I do to audit. So there isn't like, it's not something simple, but it's definitely needed, especially again, if your website's old and it's been around for a while. I saw something about tabs and accordions. Can you elaborate? I sure can. Let me just take a drink and then I'll cover that. Amy, here's a great example of this. So say you're a graphic designer, created, and I have a client who actually had this happen. I'm working on SEO with them. They had their site redesigned before coming to me, and the graphic designer has their software, like the modules that they have for software, as tabs on one page. Here's the problem with that, is each module really is a search phrase on its own, right? Each one is a standalone search phrase that isn't going to be used for topical references in semantic search, because it itself is a topic. And when it's in a tab, it limits the information that you can present, and there is no way to link into it from either inside the site or outside the site. So it makes it really hard to optimize for that phrase because it's buried in a tab in a bigger page. And so that goes against you with SEO. So you really need to think about, when you're doing the design, you know, do I need those tabs? Are they going to help both the user, and are they going to help with the actual, building of backlinks and things like that? And so that's something that you have to consider at the graphic design phase, as well as the development buildup, because you might get to development and you might realize that those tabs were a mistake and you need to update the design. That is exactly what I'm going to be telling my client when we go into the next phase of our project, because those tabs go against them and all of their SEO efforts. Okay, oops, sorry about that. Let's see, I saw something about, I read that one. Can you recommend a good tool? That's again from Nora. No, I can't, because, well, I can recommend some. So Google Search Console is a great tool that you can use. You should be using to do some audits. I love SEMrush. I love DynoMapper. Screaming Frog is one that people love. Gosh, there's a lot of them, and they do bits and pieces of information. So it's really, there isn't one tool, there's just a lot of good tools. If I were to tell you to pick one, it would be SEMrush, because I think it'll help pull a lot of, it will highlight probably, I would say 40% of potential issues. Another question about the website audits. I'm glad that people are thinking about this and asking about those, because they are really important. All right. How important is the language indicators that you are giving to search engines? So if you're doing multi-language, they're really, really important, right? If you've got a multi-language site, it is important. And I'm pretty sure that the Yoast team just created a really good blog post that goes through the whole international presentation of your website. And I think they've got either a new plugin or new training for that. So that might be something that you want to check out, Patrick, if you do deal with a lot of international activity. Let's see, Teresa asks, Yoast SEO Premium, will it help with creating content for related terms and groups? Yes, because Yoast Premium allows multiple phrases and it will help you focus more on a topic as opposed to an individual keyword phrase. I do really like the Yoast plugins, and I think that the premium ones are worth their money. I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but I absolutely think that in today's environment. Okay, so spell the SEM rush. So it's SEM and then rush. And if you search for that, Dale, it should pop up because it is a very popular software program. And I do have links on it on the various sites because I do encourage people to use it because I love it so much. How important is schema for e-commerce sites? So you can have like the structured data and the schema for reviews and pricing and availability, and there's a lot of different factors for e-commerce. So I do think that it is important, Marge, if you have an e-commerce site, I would encourage you, if it's a WooCommerce site, Yoast has a plugin, again, a premium plugin that can help deliver some of that data for you. When I had our theme store, I definitely had that plugin installed and used, and what I liked about it was, more than anything else, it would push the reviews over to the search engines so the search engines could see that data and they could push it forward into search engine results, which would make my templates stand out on the search results page more than other people's because they would see like 5-star reviews and it just grabs your attention. So I definitely think that that is something that would be of value if you've got e-commerce. Okay, so is KW Finder good? Ben, I love KW Finder. I use it all the time. Absolutely would encourage you to use it. The downside is if you listen to any of my past training, I say it's like $12 a month. They've raised prices since I first started using it. So it is a little bit more expensive, but I think it's a really good tool for finding keywords, seeing what's on page one, thinking about variations and things like that. Just really, really helpful. And I would encourage people to use that tool if you feel like you need some assistance with the keyword research and just really figuring out whether you can rank for something or not. Just one final note, because we are running out of time. I do have a summit coming up in March on technical SEO. While this is primarily focused on WordPress developers, implementers, and agencies, end users are also welcome to take it. I'm going to be covering all of the various elements people should be aware of before launch, at launch, and after launch, right? Those list of technical things that I showed you, like the breadcrumbs and tabs and things like that, we're covering that. We're going to talk about, why does it matter, and what do you got to do and what do you got to consider and review in your launch process to make sure that the websites that you're building are of high quality and that are SEO friendly. There's a 25% coupon code. Just put in Modern SEO and that will be applied from now until Friday. So I thank so much for all of you joining me today. Again, I will have this recording sent out via email to you all, as well as posted to YouTube. And I think I have another webinar coming in 2 months, and that one we're going to look at the Yoast SEO plugins. What do people always miss? Because I see a lot of misusage of them or lack of usage. And I'm going to take you through all of the things that I try to coach people on using with them and configuring them, so you're really getting the most out of those plugins and making sure that you're putting your website at the top of Google as fast as you can and in the right spot. So thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you all in a few months.